Nothing in the sky at all. Then all of a sudden, bam! What is that? Anybody tell me what that is? We're in the middle of the ocean on a ferry. Nothing around. Look. Nothing around.
For over 100 years, strange activity has been occurring off the southern coast of California, even to current times. Mile for mile, this area is one of the most top producers of unidentified flying objects and unidentified submerged object reports. Drawing on the first-hand testimonies from the Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, police officers, lifeguards and residents, researchers have presented compelling cases for possible existence of an undersea UFO base. Sightings of weird lights, anomalous glowing clouds, strange objects flying in and out of the ocean. Mass UFO sightings and encounters with unusual beings have also been consistently reported over the last 60 years. The location has become known as a hotbed of activity, and the reports keep flooding in.
Mile for mile, this body of water is one of the biggest producers of USOs, unidentified submerged objects, on the entire planet. It lies between Santa Catalina and the mainland and reaches depths of nearly 5,000 feet. Dennett documented about 150 cases of UFOs and USOs here, reaching back nearly 100 years and still happening today. Boaters who choose to travel in this area do so at their own risk. There are nearly a dozen cases on record here in which boaters have found themselves targeted by USOs.
If you do a study regarding coastal UFO phenomena, it's quite alarmingly, they're high results. There's a lot of UFO incidents, especially those which are very well documented in cases, which seem to be associated to UFOs that come from the sea. If we look at the 1977 and 1978 Colares UFO incident, which was of a small island off the shores of Brazil, these objects were seen over a period of a few months coming from the sea. They always came out of the water and came from the direction of the sea. And they actually, they attacked people. This is what happened in the Colares UFO incident. It's not the only time as well. It also happened in India. And again, that was also in a location not too far from the sea. We have to ask, is that because they have a connection to the sea, to our oceans? I mean, we do know that this phenomenon is hypervasive at the end of the day. So isn't it possible that they could be utilising our seas and oceans to hide themselves until they get close to the locations where they want to be, just being kept out of sight? Very possible. They have demonstrated being hypervasive on many, many occasions, but when looking over all figures, UFOs have a very strong connection to the oceans, seas and lakes of our planet.
Consider what happened to the Washington family on July the 10th, 1955. At around 2:30 p.m, Mr. and Mrs. Washington and their 11-year-old daughter were 13 miles off the coast of Newport Beach on their way to Catalina Island on their yacht, when Mrs. Washington spotted the strange object hovering at about 2,500 feet. Mr. Washington stopped the boat so they could better observe the object. Using binoculars, they saw a perfectly round grey-white craft. It appeared to be rotating and was surrounded by a strange haze. After about 6 minutes of observation, the Washingtons restarted their boat and continued their journey. To their amazement, the object maintained its position directly over the boat. Mr. Washington radioed the Coast Guard and explained their situation. The officials at the Coast Guard told Washington to keep the object in sight and they would launch a plane to investigate. Suddenly, the object rose upward in a zigzag maneuver and disappeared into the clouds. By the time the Coast Guard plane arrived, the object was long gone.
Unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, really could be no different than UFOs, unidentified flying objects. It's just simply, these things seem to have the capability to traverse not only in space, but through our air and probably underwater. This is what is referred to as transmedium travel. These references have been brought up by the ATIP program on more than one occasion. Now, water really might not be any different than space, to be honest with you. It's just treated as a vacuum. But some of these objects have travelled quite fast. 70 knots or 80 miles an hour has been reported of some of these objects on radar travelling underwater, some of them considerably faster.
A similar case occurred in July 1987 to a group of people sailing from Catalina to Palos Verdes. It was around 4 a.m. when they saw what they first thought was a plane coming along the normal flight pattern. But as it approached, several strange details became apparent, says the witness. I noticed no tail, no wings, and no lights. Then it hovered over my sailboat, making no noise, and went towards Catalina Island and out of sight. Proof that UFOs are targeting boaters occurred on January the 3rd, 2004. On that day, young Chiron was on the coast of Santa Monica during the afternoon when he observed a metallic disc-like object hovering a few thousand feet above the yacht. The object stayed stationary in the sky, so he quickly grabbed his camera and snapped a photograph. Because he knew the length of the yacht, he estimated the size of the UFO as being about 30 feet wide. After a few moments, the strange craft darted away. These three cases involve UFOs flying and hovering above boaters. However, in this area, there are even more cases in which boaters found themselves targeted by objects coming from beneath them, USOs. Just ask the crew of the Hattie D. On February the 5th, 1964, 11 survivors were rescued by the Coast Guard from their emergency life raft following the sinking of their yacht, the Hattie D, off the coast of Mendocino. What makes their story particularly unusual is that all 11 survivors insist that they were sunk by an unidentified undersea object. The boat had set sail from Seattle, Washington, and was making its way down the coast of California when tragedy struck. Without any warning, the yacht either struck or was rammed by an unidentified metal object. The boat sank shortly after, without any evidence remaining of what had struck their boat. Crewman Carl Jansen elaborated on the event, saying, "I don't care how deep it was, what held us was steel and a long piece. There was no give to it at all. Whatever sunk the Hattie D remains unidentified."
Just as UFO encounters date back considerable time, so do USO encounters. One of my favourites is the diary logs of the Kon-Tiki expedition in 1947, which was considered to be some type of large log raft crossing vast distances of the ocean to get to Polynesia, I believe. These logs describe the sightings of some type of faint illuminations down on the water, sometimes round, oval or even triangular, which would suddenly split into two. 3 of these strange lights were wandering round in slow circles underneath the craft apparently, and had been described as at around about 5 fathoms in length, pretty large. The crew would watch phosphorescent eyes drifting on the surface of the water on dark nights. The diary logs also describe a sighting of something like a big wheel coming up from the water and rotating in the air. Some of these sightings lasted up to 4 hours, and occasionally the sea was seen to boil and bubble.
A classic case of a UFO targeting a boater occurred sometime in the 1980s. An anonymous gentleman, a senior electronics engineer, sailing on a foggy day between Santa Barbara Island and Santa Cruz Island, observed a fluorescent green-colored light ahead of him in the mist. Thinking it was another ship using bright lights to navigate the fog, he stopped and waited for it to pass. As it approached, however, he was still unable to distinguish any detail. When it was a quarter of a mile away and heading directly towards him, the witness discovered why. Says the witness, "I finally realized that this dumb thing was underwater. I'm guessing it was, I don't know, maybe 300 feet in diameter, but I couldn't get any vertical dimension on it because it was under me in the water. It literally passed directly underneath me." The witness was sailing a fully equipped 38-foot sailboat. As the object passed beneath him, he took several readings from the depth sounder, determining that the object was about 100 feet deep. At this point, both depth sounders quit functioning. The witness checked his compasses. As he says, all three of them were slowly rotating and I wasn't. I tried calling the Coast Guard and the radio was dead. The object moved away and disappeared, leaving the witness badly frightened. A later check on his equipment revealed that all the compass mountings were broken. Says the witness of the incident, "It was weird. I was just too goddamn petrified to move." It happens in case after case. When witnesses see a USO, they realize it is directly beneath their boat. In July of 1988, a man was making a night crossing to Catalina Island. He was aiming for 2 harbors, but when he reached the island, he realized he had gone too far east. He turned west and traveled along the Catalina coast towards 2 harbors. Says the witness, all of a sudden, the ocean lit up like a built-in pool about 100 yards on both sides of me. Now, I'm a night scuba diver and know how light goes underwater. This was different. The light was in a perfect square. Besides the ocean lighting up right under my boat, the sighting seemed to be very brief. It lasted only about 15 seconds, but when I reached 2 harbors, it seemed like I'd lost 2 hours. It was very late. I never thought much about the time then. The witness says he never saw any actual object, just white light in the shape of a square. At the time, he had never heard of USOs. It wasn't until he heard other similar reports he realized he had seen one himself. While the Santa Catalina Channel is extremely active with USO reports, Dennett also received reports of USOs from across the world, most of which involved boaters who found themselves of extreme interest to USOs. One such case comes from a gentleman called Dean Sanders. Says Dean, in August of 1984, after completing a month-long cruise in the Abacos Islands of the Bahamas, we were on our 30-foot sailboat sailing from Walker Key, Bahamas to Jacksonville, Florida. We were about 90 miles off Daytona, Florida. We were on a course of 310 degrees at about 3 knots. At about 1 a.m., I noticed a green-colored beam of light sweeping the water under the boat from right to left. This was followed by another and another sweep of light under the water at regular intervals. This went on for a while, and the beams kept sweeping under the boat. As the time went on, the beams grew stronger and more well-defined. About 15 minutes after we first noticed the light beams in the water, a large green object passed directly under our boat of about 300 degrees. The object was round, about 100 to 150 feet in diameter, and had spokes of green light radiating from it, rotating counterclockwise, and bright lights around the mid-diameter. After the object passed under the boat, we saw the beams of light, now sweeping from left to right, for at least 20 minutes before we could no longer make them out. There is no way I can tell you what we saw, but it was real. I have seen submarines, and I can tell you this was not a sub. Dean said that it was as if the object had aimed for his boat, heading right underneath it. It came in at a slight angle, traveling about 15 knots, 3 times their own speed. By the laws of chance, says Dean, for it to go directly under my boat is pretty thin. I feel like it came by to take a look. Another gentleman who contacted Dennett after hearing about his research was very reluctant to share his story, but finally felt compelled to do so, only on the condition of complete anonymity. I am loath to contact you, he writes, but I've been waiting for more information on USOs, and you seem to fill the gap a bit. There is not a lot out there. Rich Baker is a certified research diver, Nitrox certified with basic scuba and advanced open water. He is also a licensed US Coast Guard captain. In 2004, Baker and 2 other men were on a decommissioned 65-foot Navy boat equipped with military-grade sonar equipment, though the sonar was no longer functional. The boat had formerly been used by the Navy for submarine warfare testing. The men had just survived a terrible storm during which they very nearly lost the boat and possibly their lives. Immediately following the storm, they were coming into the Dominican Republic, Haiti area. It was nighttime and they were heading close to the shore to find shelter. Baker was on watch. Suddenly, his eye was drawn towards a small luminescent ring under the water, approaching his boat. It glowed bright-eyed green and was moving directly toward him. Suddenly, there was another one, and then another. The other witnesses rushed to look as more rings of light appeared. Baker saw now that they were larger than he thought. Some were closer and brighter, others were deeper and appeared smaller and dimmer. Some were only 10 feet deep, others appeared to be as deep as 100 feet. There may have been more, but were not visible in the deeper waters. They approached directly beneath the boat and pulsed on and off in seemingly random patterns. Baker and the other men were shocked. They wondered what kind of strange sea creatures these could be. They didn't appear to be jellyfish. On the contrary, they appeared to be artificial. All the donuts of light seemed to be identical, though at different depths. It was hard to tell if they were moving or were just blinking on and off. They were only visible near the vessel. As they moved towards the bay, it was like being in a minefield as the strange objects flashed on and off. Most alarming was the way the objects seemed to target only their boat and the area around it. As they moved into anchor, the objects continued to light up around them. Baker had the distinct feeling that the objects were aware of them, since they followed us and surrounded us. We've now examined 8 cases in which boaters have been targeted by UFOs and USOs. All of these cases follow the same exact pattern. For some reason, UFOs and USOs are very attracted to boats. While at sea, boaters have to be aware of many things: wind and waves, regulations and safety, of other boaters, not to mention the wildlife. There is now one more thing to add to the list: USOs.
When studying the subject of underwater UFOs, or USOs, as they're better commonly known, there are literally thousands all over the world, many reported incidents. Documented reports from police officers, naval personnel, fishermen, the military, the Coast Guard, and of course, ocean commuters. However, old documents found in Ireland's public records also describe strange incidents that date back to the 1800s. One such report reads, "One evening long ago in harvest time, a strange thing was seen coming, flying through the air. It was like a train and was loaded with white people. There was an old fort in the village where fairies used often. When this strange train came to the lake, it dropped all at once onto the lake and was sending steam up into the air. After a while, it dropped into the fort and was never seen again." Now, a number of things to point out here. The first thing is that the object was described as looking like a train, possibly cylindrical shaped with the bank of windows. Things like that have been reported many times. Number 2, it was a strange statement to say the craft was full of white people. During the mid-1800s, there were very little black people in Ireland, so why did the witness emphasize on the word white people? Who or what were these white figures he was seeing? And number 3, the craft made a controlled landing into the fort, which is an old name for a lake. Steam came from the craft and on contact with the water as if it was very hot or extremely... I need to go back to number 3, Jerry. Up a bit. Number 3, okay, from there. Number 3, the craft made a controlled landing into the fort, which was an old name for a lake. Steam came off the craft as if it was in contact with the water and it was very hot. And then it quickly sank beneath the water, never to be seen again. Just as documented incidents of ghost rockets over Sweden in 1946, similar craft were seen and photographed descending into lakes. Steam was also seen and heard coming from these craft as they touched the water. Military officers occasionally attended these scenes. They were called out and they carried out investigations, sending divers into the water and even dredging the whole lakes, which actually revealed nothing. Clearly whatever this craft was landed on the water and sank beneath must have travelled off in different locations away from that area. More modern day sightings still occur on an alarming scale of this very same nature. Things descending onto lakes and water, disappearing underneath and never to be seen again.